Hey, it's Scott. Welcome back to Lip Service. My next guest is an absolute food legend. I think you're going to really enjoy this. Andrew Zimmern and me talk about everything from the best places in the world to eat to what tastes terrible, but maybe looks okay. I don't know. There's so much in between we get into. I think you're going to really enjoy this. Check it out soon. Andrew Zimmern. My next guest is an absolute food legend, and those of you that know me and know me well know that I'm a huge foodie, so I'm so excited to bring you Mr. Andrew Zimmern. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Great to see you. You grew up in New York, so I feel like, do you miss New York at all? You hear a lot?
I come to New York often enough. I can't get there as much as I would like to. But yeah, you can't take the New Yorker, out of the human being. I lived there the first 30 and a half years of my life. And then I moved to Minnesota.
A lot of people don't know that you've had this extensive career in radio before you went on to host a million food shows. So tell me about your humble upbringings and how it all started for you.
Well, it was funny. I had a restaurant here in the Twin Cities after I moved here and realized that I needed a bigger audience for my stories. I was telling stories. I'm a storyteller. That's really what I do for a living. And I was telling stories through my food and telling stories on plates and actually telling stories, doing table touches. And then I quit it trying to, get some TV stuff made, but I realized I didn't have any media training at all. So I went at age 35 or something like that to 36 to about I went to a radio station, a magazine, and a TV station, and the big ones here in town. And I said, "How'd you like an intern?" And they said, "Sure." And in those days, you didn't pay interns. And so I worked for free in all of them for 90 days and made myself indispensable. One of them was a radio station that I just was learning the ins and outs of how it all worked. And then I started a sponsored food radio program weekends, Saturday in the morning. And that led to eventually I was doing a drive time radio show with Colleen Cruz as a co-host called Afternoon Delight here in the Twin Cities, which was such a blast. But by that time, Travel Channel had bought what became Bizarre Foods, and it just became harder and harder and harder to do radio. I was gone more than I was there. I tell people it was the best job that I ever had, and also one of the hardest. I mean, to maintain the same level of personality, emotion, drive, all the rest of that for 3 hours, because people are not listening the whole time. Some are tuning in at 3, some are tuning in at 5. Some catch you, on a good day or a bad day. So it was a lot of good discipline, and love radio.
When did you first fall in love with, we all love food, but when did you really fall in love with the idea of food and maybe television or radio, and you thought, I could really make something of myself with this?
That's a great question. People always ask me, when did you first know you were, about the food thing? And I never knew a time when I wasn't. It was, since I was a little kid.
We're all eating at an early age.
But right? Professionally, that's a great question. I think I was in our restaurant, which was a French restaurant here in the Twin Cities. And to drive business on Wednesdays, I wanted to do something different. And so we decided to cook food out of the French colonial experience, right? So we started doing that. I love cooking Vietnamese food, Chinese food, Thai food, and have been doing it for a long time. And I said, well, let's do for our we'll have our menu, but we'll do a special 4 or 5 course Vietnamese menu every Wednesday night. And I went back and researched old recipes, ones that were really French influenced from the city of Hue, which in Vietnam is probably still has the Frenchiest experience there as a traveler. And it was very successful. But one of the things that I realized was I had to explain the food a lot more to our staff. I had to explain the history a lot more to everyone. I mean, there was a lot more teaching that went on. And I think that was the first time I realized I'm good at this. I need a bigger audience. And I really started to think maybe I need to be in a different room than a kitchen to be telling these stories.
Well, you have such an interesting journey, man. At a certain point, you were homeless, and you're sober now, but you were not sober for many years. Talk to me about your path and how you eventually led up to getting the show on the Food Network and everything in between, like we just discussed.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, short story was, grew up in New York City in the 60s and 70s. Was a complete and total mess, a user of people and a taker of things before I picked up a drink or a drug. Then had access to booze and drugs and, a daily cocaine and heroin user by the time I was a freshman in college. Jails, institutions, a short stint in prison once.
What for?
I mean, a really, really rough time.
What were you in prison
lived
for?
On the streets, selling drugs.
Selling drugs, okay.
Then went on to do some various degrees of homelessness before I went permanently homeless, and lived in an abandoned building in Lower Manhattan. And every day stealing a bottle or a can of Comet cleanser from the bodega down the street to sprinkle around the pile of dirty clothes that I passed out on every evening, so the rats and roaches wouldn't crawl over me. And I lived that way for 13 months. I thought that was okay. I mean, that was, and then one day I had the brilliant, I realized it's not okay. And I thought, well, there's losers in life and there's winners, and I'm clearly a loser. And I decided to try to kill myself, and swallowed a fistful of barbiturates and drank a bottle of vodka and went to meet my maker, and woke up miraculously, according to the doctors I later spoke with, and wasn't dead.
Wow.
Plugged the phone back into the wall. I always took the phone out of the wall. Any room I was in, I didn't want the phone call. It didn't matter who it was. I just didn't want the phone call. And called a friend and did something I had never uttered these words in my entire life. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And that has sort of become a mantra of mine. And I think the secret to success, I think, for that I would pass on to other people is, not knowing is a sign of strength, not of weakness. And the more you ask and engage, the more you learn. You remain teachable. It creates humility. It creates empathy. It's a one-stop shop sentence for improving one's life. And I wound up 2 days later on a plane, went to Minnesota, went to a treatment center that was 32 and a half years ago. Hazelden was a great experience for me. And I've been sober ever since. And things got dramatically better once we removed drugs and alcohol from my equation. I will say one thing about this that I think is probably most important. We have millions of people in this country who are homeless, suffer from mental health challenges, alcoholics, addiction, gambling addiction. I mean, you name it. And we marginalize these people, and we don't give them the opportunity to get well. But I will tell you, as someone who shined up pretty decently from a really horrific bottom, that if we sprinkle these people with dignity and kindness and love, instead of shaming and marginalizing them and ignoring them in most cases, we will have a very motivated piece of our population that can rejoin the human race. And I think that's incredibly important.
Well, you're an incredible story about perseverance and how you worked hard to get where you are. And that story is amazing. When you think about your life, I think you and I were connecting not long ago. We did a Zoom early on. We were talking about the fact that I think Bizarre Foods is something crazy like 37 countries, Andrew, I believe. Was it 37 countries that the show was in? Am I correct in saying?
Well, it still airs. Well, it airs all over the world now. Obviously, the Max streamer is in many. It still airs on Discovery, Travel, and Living in the countries that don't. So it still airs in 170 countries.
170.
And that's the number.
Wow.
Yes, that's the number of countries that it airs in.
China.
I think we visited.
China and everywhere in between, right?
Oh, as a matter of fact, it's one of only 2 food shows with an American hosting in China. I've been to the People's Republic about 20 times, and it's incredible how well known I am there. And I don't say this from an ego standpoint. It's just very strange to be in Canada where the show airs on the most expensive cable service. So very few Canadians are familiar with Bizarre Foods. And so I can walk around. No one knows who I am in Canada, which is lovely. I go to China and it's like a mob scene. It's crazy. It's like something out of an early 60s Beatles movie. It's everything but running through the streets. I was very lucky that, the stats online are sort of skewed because the way Travel Channel and IMDb creates these stats is that there was Bizarre Foods, and that they say that ran for 6 seasons or something. It was actually 13 seasons over 12 years. And the reason is because we had Bizarre Foods, we had Bizarre Foods America, we had Bizarre World. We had all these, they kept renaming it so that the PR division within Travel Channel at the time had something new to say to people about a new season. It was always the same show. But then we also had Delicious Destinations that spun off from that. We made, I think, 400 episodes of Delicious Destinations.
Incredible.
And, so when you include all of that together, it's, 500 shows that I made for Travel Channel over those 12 years that are basically, it's the same sort of thing. Then I've done a couple shows for Food Network, a bunch for, Magnolia, and of course the 2 shows that I'm very proud of all of them. Bizarre Foods obviously is the one I will probably die, and that will be the one that will be the lead in the obituary. But What's Eating America for MSNBC a couple years ago is probably the show that I'm proudest of. I really think it's one of the most important pieces of work that's been done in the food space, and I'm really blessed that I was the one who was doing it.
Well, it's interesting. We connected in so many ways. The fact that, my obsession outside of music is really food, and you love music. So we were chatting about bands like Cheap Trick and bands that because we have this connection other than food, which we will get into because there's so many top 5 questions I have to ask you. But talking about your connection to music, because obviously it's a big thing and that's my whole life. But aside from that, people know me as a huge foodie.
Well, I was born in 1961. So I grew up in the 60s with my parents becoming obsessed about things like the record player and the 8-track system, and stereo sets were being sold and stereo systems being put into people's homes. So there was a real love affair with music that came from my parents. My mom had stood online for almost a day as a little girl waiting to see Frank Sinatra. And she still had that vibe. She loved going to shows. And my friends and I got really into music, and my parents thought, well, concerts and music are a really great thing. So when I was, 1974, I think it was the Rolling Stones' Sticky Fingers tour, Elton John's Yellow Brick Road tour, Earth, Wind and Fire's Gratitude tour. I mean, these are, classic albums. And, I got to go and see them. And once I would go and come home a couple times, your parents trust you, which was a huge mistake on their part. And in New York in the 70s, especially, 74 to 79, maybe into 80, 81, the club scene had incredible music. I mean, we would go to the Ritz, every Friday night if there wasn't a better band playing at other clubs around, just to see who was playing. And everyone from, we saw the Go-Go's first performance there. We saw Brian Stetzer's first performance there. But we were also going to CBGB's in the day. I mean, I was there. The Ramones were playing there almost every single weekend. We saw, everyone from the Cramps' first New York City performance to, this is the great thing about New York. You could go to Friday night to CBGB's and see a brand new band that would become, a legend in the punk scene or the punk pop scene. And then the next night go see Pink Floyd at the Garden,
right.
And that's what we did, on weekends. And so I just developed a love affair with music and with guitar players. And, I really am. And I will say this, all the travel that I did sort of broadened my horizons to a lot of international music. So I really am an equal opportunity listener and devotee. And I don't know, music makes the world go round. I have a couple of people. If people are into it, I have a couple of, I should make more, a couple of playlists on Spotify for music to cook by.
Amazing.
And I have a good driving list on Spotify, which I think, of course, starts with Iggy Pop's "I'm a Punk Rocker," which is, along with Radar Love, probably the two great, baseline, let's get in the car and move tunes, in my opinion.
Speaking about connectivity, talk to me about meeting your friend that I never got to meet, Anthony Bourdain. Iggy was on his show. He was a huge music aficionado. I know you are too. When did you first meet Anthony Bourdain, and what was he like? I never got to meet him.
Well, we met in New York when we were both cooking. He was at Leal. I had yet to get sober and was still working in the food business. And he was just, tall, funny, nice guy. There was that cook to cook sort of thing. We found out we had a lot in common. He had gone to Vassar. I went to Vassar. We both liked drugs. We both liked to cook. We both liked music. He was a very, if I was broad and accepting of many styles, Tony, in very typical Tony style, was very obsessed with whatever it was, whatever narrow band he was obsessed with. And if you brought up another band that was outside of that genre that he was really into at those days, it was horseshit. And he would tell you why and eviscerate you for liking one of their songs, usually in a very humorous way. When I was making season 1 of Bizarre Foods and Out on the Road, contracted by Travel Channel. We had already made 3 or 4 specials the year beforehand, 2 specials, including the special called Bizarre Foods of Asia that would later become the series Bizarre Foods. When we were making that special, he was out making a show called A Cook's Tour for Food Network that lasted 1 season, and then Travel Channel bought it and then threw that show out and told him to make a new show, which he developed for them, that became No Reservations. So his show premiered 6-8 months before mine did, but we were shooting them all at the same time. His show blew up. The world fell in love with him. And they decided with my show to put it on the same night as his, as the lead-in. He was at 9:00. I was at 8:00 on Travel Channel. And we went to shoot promos for that. And we had met, like I said, a couple times before as cooks in New York City. But now things were different. And, he was hysterically funny and kept telling me, They've put 5 shows ahead of mine. None of them have worked. Yours better work, motherfucker. But it was that day we were shooting promos on the Brooklyn Bridge, and both shows, mine was about to air. His show was very popular. Mine was about to be very popular, and the night was about to explode. I mean, those first 3 years on Monday nights with our shows back to back, were some of the most epic numbers in cable TV history, and up against Monday Night Football and doing very, very well. But he looked over at me, and I was just, I'm a different kind of talker. We have much different personalities. And I was telling him how excited I was that he and I brought integrity to the world of travel and food. And he looked at me and he said, integrity. He said, the minute you sign a contract to be in television, you've lost every ounce of integrity you have. And the director, screamed at us, like action, and we had to go start our thing. But I've never forgotten that moment. Over the next 12, 13, 14 years, until he took his life, sadly, 5 years ago, we became very close. We would bump into each other overseas. We'd make a point when I was in New York to get together and have a meal. We became closer and closer, and the world lost one of the truly great human beings. The energy that he had when he walked into a room was unbelievable. I mean, everyone wanted to be with him. Everyone wanted to be his friend. He was endlessly fascinating, could talk about anything from 1950s French New Wave cinema to the best place to get, laksa in Singapore. And one of the most magnetic human beings that I know. And as someone who, ultimately became very close to him, someone who was so kind and so loving and so funny with his friends. I will share one great story. He would call me sometimes on weekends. On weekends they would do these massive bizarre foods or no reservations runs where from 10 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, because they didn't have weekend programming. They would just air like the best stuff. It's just wall to wall, one right after another. And he would have plans to go spending the day with his daughter, right? Because dad was home and he was going to take her out, and then they do lunch and they had all these movies. And she would say, no, I just want to stay home with you and watch TV and stuff. And he would say, okay. And then she would put on Bizarre Foods and it drove him crazy. And this is, by the way, is true of, my kid could care less about my own show. But when he was young, was really obsessed with Tony's show because Tony was cool. And, your own dad isn't cool. But Ariana, his daughter, would just obsess about Bizarre Foods, and he would call me and he would just he'd just be growling into the phone, and I would just be laughing hysterically because I knew exactly what was happening. And one of the funniest things that we experienced was we finally all got together down at South Beach the year that he and I were participating in the tribute dinner to Jose Andres at the South Beach Food and Wine Festival. And Jose is a good friend of Tony's, a good friend of mine. And I was cooking a course for the meal that whoever is being the tribute, whoever is being paid tribute to picks the chefs that they want to cook for them and who they want to handle the lectern. So Tony was emceeing. I was cooking along with 4 or 5 other chefs. And the day beforehand, we said, let's get ice cream with the kids. And we got them together, and Noah just ran to Tony and just wanted to talk to him. And Ariana just ran. It was we just looked at each other like, fatherhood. Yeah. Who the fuck knew? It was pretty funny. It was a good night.
That's awesome. Well, I think the whole world wants to know where you eat. And so I wanted to ask you some top 5s, which we'll get into. I guess if you had to say your top 5 food cities in the world, Andrew, what would you consider them, starting with number 5?
Well, number 5 is is going to this is what media people do. We sneak things in because we're just, we're just conniving motherfuckers. Number 5 is a tie. Paris and Madrid. I can't separate them. As great as so many other European capitals are for food, when it comes to travel and food, for both the breadth of offerings and the depth and the things to do while you're there, nothing beats Paris and Madrid. More variety than Berlin or Rome. I mean, I'll just give you an example. In Paris, there's incredible Vietnamese food, right? Bigger than Lisbon or Brussels. They're both the ultimate walking towns. I think they're perfect choices. And I will say this, as some of the most incredible food in the world is being cooked in Spain right now. It's just that San Sebastian, which has more 3-star Michelin and 2-star Michelin restaurants, I think, than any other city in the world, super tiny. It just doesn't have other stuff. I mean, there's 25 great restaurants there. And the food, by the way, is great anywhere you jump in. But from a travel and food capital standpoint, it doesn't measure up, although it's probably 8th or 9th on my list. Paris is always shat on. It's like it's uncool, as if it was like obvious or it was so hot for so long. But every time I go back to Paris, I'm reminded this place, it just has some of the best food in the world, bar none. It really is quite incredible.
Is that number? So do we hit all 5 there?
No, that was the first. Oh, that was number 5.
That was okay. Number 4.
We're up to number 4.
Okay. Let's go for number 4. Top food city in the world.
Mexico City. There are 2 great global cuisines that I think are far and away more sophisticated and have more to offer by region, by ingredient, by technique than any other. Quote unquote Mexican food is one of them. The reason why I put it in quotes is that Mexican food has to include both pre-colonial, pre-contact, and post-contact food. And I mean, just go to the, District Federal, Mexico City, where people from all 22, 24 states in Mexico will go to find success. And they bring their food with them. The variety, the flavors there is. I mean, Mexico City, number 4 in my book, one of the best cities in the world for travel and food.
Number 3, Andrew.
Tokyo, kind of obvious.
My favorite.
A very narrow focus, despite the fact there are great French restaurants in Tokyo. There are great Italian restaurants in Tokyo. Some people make the argument that the best pizza in the world is made in Tokyo. People go to certain French restaurants there and say that's the best French restaurant I've ever eaten, because the Japanese are so precise. Their technique is flawless. Their ability to cook in different modalities is insane, because culturally, they understand that you must take years to master your craft. In America, we're the opposite. Young cooks who are making salads in a mediocre restaurant come up to me and say, "How do I get my own TV show?" I mean, in America, it's the exact opposite. I don't want to. Here, it's like, how do I work less and get to the top faster? And in Tokyo, it's like I'm willing to work and toil in anonymity for 20 years just to get my shot. And the result is just sheer brilliance, devotion to technique, and respect for ingredients that you don't find in any other cuisine, truly, across the board. I mean, Tokyo is a marvel of a city to eat in and, of course, to travel through.
It's my favorite city in the whole world. I was actually upset with myself that I hadn't been there sooner when I finally got to go there. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Isn't that the case? Isn't that the case?
No
I mean,
question.
you really feel, I had the exact same feeling. I'm like, why have I been going other places the rest of my life? I only want to keep returning to Tokyo and obviously environs. And when we talk about travel as an example, you can hop on a bullet train and be in Kanazawa in 2 hours. Kanazawa is the West Coast city on the island of Honshu that was the birthplace of the geisha, of the samurai, of Japanese Buddhism. And to walk the cobblestone streets of Kanazawa at night after an incredible dinner, and just you're transported back to 13th century Japan. And then you hop on a bullet train and you're back sleeping in your hotel room in Tokyo that night is
Incredible.
Nothing beats Tokyo.
Number 2, Andrew.
Well, the other great cuisine in the world is Chinese cuisine, along with Mexican. I think everything else falls after that in terms of variety, depth, breadth, technique, cuisine, region, ingredient choice. And it's just immense. And our conception of Chinese food here in America has certainly grown over the last decade and a half. But it barely touches the tip of what is being cooked over there, region by region, city by city, town by town, neighborhood by neighborhood. And Chengdu in China, in the Sichuan province, people think that Sichuan just means spicy food, that they cook very narrowly. In fact, Chengdu is the capital city of Sichuan province, but the entire province is the breadbasket of China. That was the agricultural, still is the agricultural center of the country. And so the food there is just absolutely mind-boggling. Yes, they use a lot of chilies. Yes, they use a lot of heat. There are also dishes that don't have that. But it is, I think, it was so hard to choose what my favorite eating city was in China because they're all amazing. But I just assume eat in Chengdu than anywhere else in the world. And I think it's the number 2 best food city in the world for travel and food. And the places that you can go from there are insane because you're sort of in the center of the country. So you want to go up into the Northeast and Uyghurs where the Mongolian border is and get into more of a meat-centric thing, do it. You want to go south and east and get into Guangzhou, formerly Canton, and check out that food. You're just perfectly located to do everything. I'm obsessed with Chengdu.
And the number 1 best food city in the world to eat in, according to Andrew Zimmern.
Not even close, New York City. And I'll tell you why. If you just took the borough of Queens and partitioned it and it was its own city, Queens would be the number 1 food city in the world. Just as an example, and forget about all by the way, incredible food, obviously, in Manhattan and Staten Island and the Bronx and Brooklyn. I mean, incredible. I could go on and on about any one of them. But just in Queens alone, you have 150 different ethnicities and cultures represented in populations of 8,000, 9,000 or more, with new arrivals all the time. So, the Liberians who live there are cooking for new Liberians who are coming. And when immigration happens, the first thing that makes someone feel at home is seeing someone who speaks their language, looks like them, has traveled the same path before you, and then puts a bowl of food in front of you.
Right.
And so if you want the best Colombian food in America, you go to Queens. If you want the best Liberian food in America, you go to Queens. You want the best Chinese food, go to Queens. You want the best Armenian food, go to Queens. Egyptian food, go to Queens. I mean, I could just keep going on and on.
What are your top, I was going to say, do you have a top 5 hidden gems in New York that we don't know about? Because while we're on the subject of New York.
Oh my gosh, hidden gems. I'd have to rack my brain. It's hard off the top of my head. And I keep these things on lists. So I'd have to go see. We can do hidden gems. We can do later. We can do a
part 2,
something written on Substack a part 2 and go through all those types of things. I will say this. This is a funny sort of Bourdain thing. When it comes to hidden gems, everyone wants to know that question: where should I be eating that I'm not eating? And I'm pretty liberal with letting people know where to go. Tony and I both shot a show in Singapore, and they aired it in the same year. And we both had gone to a place for laksa there called Mary's Laksa, a little shop that made 100 bowls a day. because their pots, they could only make 100 bowls worth of broth in their pot, and they only had enough burners for enough noodles to do 100, maybe it was a little more, 150 portions. Bourdain goes there, says, this is the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. I go there and I say, this is the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. About a decade later, I go back to Singapore. I go to Mary's Laksa. There's a line down the block. I hop in line, right? And I'm waiting for about 15 minutes. The line is moving fairly quickly. It's a very quick dish to process. And I see one of Mary's daughters coming out the door, and she's looking up and down the line, and she starts walking down the line. I think she's coming to talk to me. But, I was like, well, that's strange. And then I realized, oh, maybe someone told her I was here or something like that, or recognized me. And she comes up to me, she starts screaming at me. She's like, you and Tony, everything was going great. Now we have to make 500 bowls of laksa. We had to buy a new oven. All this complaining. I'm like, that's a complaint? You're like, you're busy? Things are going well? It was pretty amusing. But yeah, there's always little hidden gems.
Well, we'll do that. We'll do that in the next Substack collab for sure.
We'll do a hidden gem. We'll do a hidden gem later. I will say, I just had this question from a friend in Los Angeles who wanted to know the best hidden gem for Chinese food in Los Angeles. And I told him it's probably Dai Ho, a Taiwanese restaurant that I think people should check out. It's one of the best eating experiences. And they were only open for lunch. An incredible little place that doesn't get enough cred. It's not just one of the best Chinese restaurants in that town. It's one of the best restaurants in that town. I guess in New York City, the one that I've been going to recently a lot, and I mentioned it on my Substack, but it's definitely a hidden gem. And I say this at the risk of now having to wait longer for my table because they don't take reservations. Is a restaurant called Ulu on 9th Street and 2nd Avenue, UHLU. A Chinese restaurant. While we're on the subject, a Chinese restaurant that is absolutely brilliant, cooking amazing food right now with the most unusual and glorious duck presentation I've seen in a long time. Incredible hot pot dishes, the best dumplings, and they do a cold sesame chicken in hot chili oil appetizer that might be my favorite plate in New York City right now.
That is on my list. We have to do a part 2, Andrew. This is so fun. I could talk to you for hours about food. Unfortunately, our time has come, but I would love to do this again. So let's make sure to check out Andrew's Substack. Check out my Substack. We're collaborating together. And Andrew, we definitely have to do this in person, and we definitely have to do this again soon. I appreciate you so much.
We gotta eat a meal together.
We gotta eat a meal together. That's next for sure. Coming up next, the meal together. Thanks, Andrew. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.